I sat in the boardroom as Gerald Hampton, our board chair, delivered the news with a smile that had probably taken him hours to perfect in the mirror. After 12 wonderful years as principal engineer, the company was going in a new direction. Younger talent, he said. Fresh perspectives, he added. The words blurred together into white noise while betrayal burned hot in my chest. I had built this facility from blueprints to operational excellence. My hand stayed steady as I signed the exit papers. Tomorrow would be my last day. Tomorrow, the annual compliance audit also began. Gerald did not seem concerned about the timing. He should have been. I arrived at the pharmaceutical manufacturing facility at 6 in the morning, 2 hours before anyone else would show up. The parking lot was empty except for the security guard's car. The building stood quiet in the early light, all glass and steel and precisely controlled environments. My building, my design, my life's work. I walked through the main entrance and badged in for what I knew would be the final time. The cool air of the lobby washed over me, maintained at exactly 68 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. I had specified that temperature. I had specified everything. The facility sprawled across 200,000 square feet of controlled manufacturing space. Every room, every system, every process bore my fingerprints. I was 28 years old when they hired me, fresh from my master's degree in chemical engineering from Purdue University, ambitious and desperate to prove myself. They gave me an impossible task back then: design a state-of-the-art pharmaceutical manufacturing facility for sterile injectable medications from the ground up. I spent 3 years of my life on that design. 3 years of 16-hour days, of calculations and recalculations, of fighting with contractors and vendors and regulatory consultants. I designed the cleanroom environmental control systems that maintained ISO Class 5 air quality. I specified the water purification systems that produced pharmaceutical-grade water. I developed the validated manufacturing processes for 6 different life-saving medications. The certifications I earned along the way hung on my office wall upstairs: professional engineer license from the state of Indiana, principal engineer of record designation from the FDA, certified quality engineer, certified pharmaceutical industry professional. Each one represented hundreds of hours of study, years of experience, examinations that made strong people cry. This facility produced medications that kept people alive. Cancer patients received their chemotherapy infusions made here. Cardiac patients got their emergency heart medications compounded in our clean rooms. People with rheumatoid arthritis and lupus and Crohn's disease depended on the immunosuppressants we manufactured. 12,000 patients across the country received medications from this facility every single month. Under my leadership, we had passed 7 consecutive annual FDA audits with 0 critical findings. 0. In an industry where a single critical finding could shut you down for months, where contamination could kill patients, where documentation errors could cost millions in recalls, we had a perfect record. I trained every engineer currently working in this building. I created the entire documentation system from scratch. The standard operating procedures, the validation protocols, the change control processes, the deviation management systems, all mine. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor and walked to my office. The space felt hollow already, as if it knew I was leaving. I started packing my personal items into boxes. Photos of the facility under construction, awards from industry organizations, a crystal plaque from our first successful FDA inspection. Thank you cards from patients whose lives depended on our work. That was when I found it, tucked into a stack of papers I was sorting, a corporate memo I had never seen before. The date at the top stopped me cold. 6 months ago. The subject line read, Cost Reduction Initiative, Engineering Department Restructuring. My hands shook as I read. Gerald Hampton and Brandon Wright, our new chief financial officer, had planned my termination half a year before it happened. They identified my position as the largest single salary expense in the engineering department, $430,000 per year, the memo stated. They found it excessive. They found me replaceable. The memo outlined their solution. Hire a younger engineer at significantly reduced compensation. The name jumped out at me. Derek Palmer, 32 years old. Bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from a decent state school. 4 years of experience at a smaller pharmaceutical company. Starting salary, $210,000. The final paragraph made my blood run cold. Derek Palmer will assume principal engineer responsibilities following a brief transition period. Termination of current principal engineer of record to occur in Q4, resulting in annual savings of $220,000. They actually wrote it down. They put it in a memo. They thought they could just transfer the principal engineer of record designation like handing off a set of keys. I sat down hard in my desk chair. Did they not understand? Principal engineer of record was not just a job title. It was a legal designation recognized by the Food and Drug Administration. You could not simply appoint someone to that role. It required specific qualifications, a professional engineer license, which took 4 years of supervised experience plus passing 2 8-hour examinations. It required demonstrated expertise in pharmaceutical manufacturing. It required FDA recognition and formal documentation filed with federal regulators. Derek Palmer had a bachelor's degree and 4 years of experience. I pulled up the state licensing board website on my computer. I searched for his name. No professional engineer license. He was not even eligible to apply yet. You needed 4 years working under a licensed PE before you could sit for the exams. They hired him 3 months ago. I remembered now. Gerald introduced him as a new senior engineer who would be learning the facility. Derek seemed nice enough, eager, asked good questions. I had spent hours showing him around, explaining our systems, never suspecting he was meant to replace me. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, bitter and sharp. They had no idea what they had done. This facility could not legally operate without a designated principal engineer of record. It was not a suggestion or a best practice. It was federal law under FDA Regulations 21 CFR Part 211. The principal engineer had to have specific credentials, had to be on site, had to maintain oversight of all manufacturing operations. Without one, the facility was non-compliant. Immediately, automatically. I thought about warning them. I pulled up Gerald's email address. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could send one message, explain the regulatory requirements, tell them they needed to fix this before the audit tomorrow. Then I remembered Gerald's condescending smile as he told me they were going in a new direction. I remembered Brandon Wright's comments in last quarter's budget meeting about my inflated compensation package. I remembered 12 years of dedication, of late nights and weekend emergencies, of carrying this company through crisis after crisis. I walked through the main entrance and badged in for what I knew would be the final time. The cool air of the lobby washed over me, maintained at exactly 68 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. I had specified that temperature. I had specified everything. My phone started ringing 20 minutes after I got home. I was sitting on my couch in sweatpants, drinking coffee, and reading a novel I had been meaning to get to for 6 months. My phone vibrated on the coffee table, the facility's main number. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. I silenced it. By 10 in the morning, I had 15 missed calls. I knew exactly what was happening. Margaret Stevenson, the FDA auditor, had arrived right on schedule, at 8 o'clock. She was punctual, thorough, and absolutely unforgiving when it came to regulatory compliance. I had worked with her for the past 3 audits. She was fair but strict, the kind of auditor who could spot a discrepancy in documentation from across the room. At the facility, Gerald Hampton and Brandon Wright greeted Margaret in the main conference room. They were confident. Why would they not be? The facility had passed every audit for 7 years straight. They had no reason to think today would be different. Margaret set up her laptop and pulled out her standard audit checklist. She always started the same way, a morning meeting with key personnel to review the audit scope and schedule. She looked around the table at Gerald, Brandon, Derek Palmer, and the heads of quality assurance and manufacturing. "I'd like to begin with a brief meeting with your principal engineer of record," Margaret said, pen poised over her notepad. "Standard protocol for the opening session." Gerald smiled easily. "We've actually had a transition in that position recently. Derek Palmer here has taken over those responsibilities. Derek, why don't you introduce yourself?" Derek looked nervous. He was a nice young man, probably terrified of messing up his first FDA audit. "Good morning. I'm Derek Palmer, senior engineer. I've been with the company for 3 months now, learning the facility systems and processes." Margaret's pen stopped moving. She looked up. "And What is your professional engineer license number, Mr. Palmer? Derek's face flushed. I don't have my PE license yet. I'm working toward it, gathering the required experience hours. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Margaret's expression shifted from routine interest to sharp attention. I see. Then, who is the current designated principal engineer of record for this facility? An awkward silence filled the conference room. Gerald cleared his throat. As I mentioned, we're in a transition phase. Our former principal engineer recently left the company, and we're in the process of formally transferring responsibilities to our engineering team. Margaret closed her laptop with a soft click that sounded loud in the quiet room. She pulled a folder from her briefcase and flipped through several pages. Your facility's FDA registration, filed in January of this year, lists Bianca Stevens as principal engineer of record. Where is Miss Stevens? Brandon spoke up, trying to sound casual. Bianca left the company yesterday, actually. Her last day was Tuesday. But we have full confidence in our engineering team to maintain our high standards. Margaret's pen stopped moving. She looked up. And what is your professional engineer license number, Mr. Palmer? Gerald leaned forward. I understand, but surely we can operate while we finalize the paperwork for the transition. Derek is fully capable of handling the technical aspects. No, Margaret said flatly. You cannot. The principal engineer of record must have a professional engineer license. They must have demonstrated expertise in pharmaceutical manufacturing. They must be approved by the FDA through formal documentation. Most importantly, they must be physically present and actively overseeing manufacturing operations. She stood up. The movement was deliberate, formal. Gentlemen, I am issuing a verbal notice of non-compliance. Effective immediately. All manufacturing operations at this facility must cease. You may not manufacture any products. You may not release any batches for distribution. You may not ship any medications currently in your finished goods inventory. Brandon shot to his feet. You can't be serious. We have patients depending on these medications. We have contracts with hospitals across the country. I am absolutely serious, Mr. Wright. This facility is operating in violation of federal regulations. I will return in 72 hours to review documentation proving you have a qualified principal engineer of record designated and approved. If you cannot provide that documentation, I will issue a written notice of intent to suspend your manufacturing license. Gerald's face had gone pale. Margaret, we've worked together for years. Surely we can find a reasonable solution here. The solution is simple, Mr. Hampton. Hire a qualified principal engineer of record. Until you do, this facility does not meet the legal requirements to manufacture pharmaceutical products. She gathered her materials and stood. I'll see you in 72 hours. I suggest you spend that time reading 21 CFR Part 211 very carefully. She walked out of the conference room. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway. Nobody moved. Brandon was the first to find his voice. What the hell just happened? Gerald stared at the closed door. I think we just shut down a $900 million facility. Someone from manufacturing poked their head into the conference room. Sir, what should we tell the production floor? There are rumors the audit went wrong. Gerald rubbed his face with both hands. Send everyone home. With pay. Tell them we'll have more information tomorrow. 380 people worked at this facility. 380 people were about to go home with no idea if they would have jobs next week. 12,000 patients across the country depended on the medications manufactured here. Without shipments, hospital pharmacies would run out of critical drugs within 2 weeks. And somewhere in the building, probably in a supply closet, someone's phone kept ringing. My phone. Still calling, still hoping I would answer. I did not answer. Gerald Hampton called an emergency executive meeting for 2 o'clock that afternoon. By the time everyone assembled in the boardroom, news of the shutdown had spread through the company like wildfire. Brandon Wright looked like he had aged 5 years and 6 hours. Derek Palmer sat in the corner, clearly understanding that this disaster somehow involved him but not quite grasping how. Susan Bradford, the corporate attorney, arrived with a stack of regulatory documents and a deeply worried expression. She was in her 50s, sharp and thorough, the kind of lawyer who actually read the fine print. Gerald quickly explained the situation. Susan listened without interrupting. When Gerald finished, she opened her laptop and pulled up the relevant FDA regulations. She read for 10 minutes while everyone waited in tense silence. Finally, she looked up. Margaret Stevenson is correct. You cannot operate this facility without a principal engineer of record who meets the federal requirements. So we hire someone, Brandon said. We put out job postings today, offer a premium salary, get someone in here by next week. Susan shook her head. It doesn't work that way. Even if you found a qualified candidate tomorrow, which is unlikely given the specialized nature of this role, the approval process takes months. The FDA has to review their credentials. The facility has to undergo inspection with the new principal engineer present. All documentation has to be updated and submitted. You're looking at a minimum of 3 to 4 months, realistically closer to 6. Gerald slumped in his chair. We don't have 6 months. We have 72 hours. Could we just hire any professional engineer temporarily? Someone from operations asked. Just to get us through the audit? Susan's expression said that was a terrible idea. The principal engineer of record has to have specific pharmaceutical manufacturing expertise. They have to know this facility's systems intimately. They have to understand every validation protocol, every manufacturing process, every piece of equipment. You can't just bring in a random licensed engineer and expect them to assume legal responsibility for a facility this complex. The awful truth settled over the room like a heavy blanket. There was only one person who met all the requirements. One person who knew every system, every process, every piece of documentation. One person who could walk back in tomorrow and legally resume the principal engineer role. Me. We need to call Bianca, Gerald said quietly. Brandon pulled out his phone and dialed my number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. He sent a text message. No response. He sent an email. Nothing. For the next 4 hours, they tried every method of contact they could think of. Phone calls, emails, text messages. They tried calling my emergency contact, which was my sister in Colorado, who told them politely that I was not taking calls from the company. They tried LinkedIn messages. Nothing worked. Meanwhile, the production floor sat empty and silent. 380 employees had been sent home, confused and worried. The manufacturing equipment that normally ran 24 hours a day stood idle. In the quality control lab, partially tested batches sat in refrigerated storage, unable to be released. By afternoon, the patient advocacy calls started. Hospital pharmacies reported they would run out of several critical medications within 10 days. Cancer centers called to ask about chemotherapy drug availability. Patients with autoimmune diseases asked when they could refill their prescriptions. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Brandon Wright got in his car and drove to my apartment complex. He found my unit number in the HR files and stood outside my door, knocking and ringing the doorbell. I was inside, perfectly aware he was there. I waited. He knocked harder. I could hear the desperation in the rhythm of it. Finally, I opened the door. I was wearing comfortable yoga pants and an old college sweatshirt, holding a mug of tea. I looked completely calm and unbothered. Brandon, on the other hand, looked like he had been through a crisis. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled, sweat on his forehead despite the cool November weather. Bianca. Thank God. I've been trying to reach you all day. I know, I said simply. We need to talk. Can I come in? No. He blinked. Please. Just 5 minutes. We made a mistake. We need your help. I walked through the main entrance and badged in for what I knew would be the final time. The cool air of the lobby washed over me, maintained at exactly 68 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. I had specified that temperature. I had specified everything. The audit. The FDA auditor shut us down. She says we can't operate without a principal engineer of record. We didn't realize that when your position was eliminated, that it would cause this kind of regulatory issue. You didn't realize that a federally mandated position had federal requirements? I took a sip of my tea. That seems like a significant oversight for a chief financial officer. Brandon's jaw clenched. We need you to come back. Temporarily. Just until we can sort this out. We'll pay you your full salary. Same compensation package. We just need you to be designated as principal engineer of record again, so we can resume operations. I reached into my sweatshirt pocket and pulled out my phone. I held it up so Brandon could see the screen. The voice recorder app was running, red numbers counting up the seconds. Could you clarify what mistake you're referring to, Brandon? For the record. His eyes widened as he realized I was recording this conversation. What? You said you made a mistake. I'd like you to be specific. Are you admitting that the company illegally terminated a federally mandated position without ensuring continuity of operations? Are you admitting that this termination violated FDA regulations and endangered public health? I didn't mean, Brandon stammered. The sweat on his forehead had nothing to do with temperature now. You're recording this? I am. It's legal in Indiana, as I'm sure you know. One-party consent for recording conversations, so I'll ask again, what exactly is the mistake you're admitting to? Brandon stepped back from my door. I should go. Will you at least think about coming back? People are depending on you. Patients need their medications. I'll think about it, I said. Then I closed the door. Through the door, I heard him stand there for another 30 seconds before his footsteps retreated down the hallway. I waited until I heard his car start in the parking lot below. Margaret's pen stopped moving. She looked up. And what is your professional engineer license number, Mr. Palmer? Patricia Donnelly had been practicing employment law for 23 years. She ran her own firm in downtown Indianapolis, with a reputation for being brilliant and ruthless in exactly the right proportions. I had consulted with her once before, years ago, when the company had tried to classify me as exempt from overtime despite regularly working 60-hour weeks. She had written one letter, and the company had immediately corrected the classification. I sent her the recording of my conversation with Brandon, along with the termination paperwork and the memo I had found outlining their cost-cutting plan. She called me back within an hour. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, bitter and sharp. They had no idea what they had done. This facility could not legally operate without a designated principal engineer of record. It was not a suggestion or a best practice. It was federal law under FDA Regulations 21 CFR Part 211. The principal engineer had to have specific credentials, had to be on site, had to maintain oversight of all manufacturing operations. What should I do? I asked. Nothing. Let them panic. Every hour that facility stays shut down strengthens your position. They're going to come back with a better offer. When they do, we're going to negotiate terms that protect you permanently. What about the patients? The employees? Patricia's voice softened slightly. I understand your concern, but you are not responsible for this situation. They are. They created this crisis through their own incompetence and greed. The best thing you can do for those patients and employees is to ensure this never happens again. That means getting real protections, real consequences for the people who made this decision. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat in my apartment, surrounded by the boxes I had brought home from my office, and I waited. I did not have to wait long. By the morning of the second day, the shutdown was no longer an internal crisis. It was public news. The company's stock price opened 18% down. Financial news websites ran stories about the unexpected halt in operations at one of the Midwest's largest pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities. Industry publications reached out for comment. Competing pharmaceutical companies started making calls to the hospital networks and pharmacy chains that relied on our medications, offering to supply alternative products. Major hospital networks sent urgent letters threatening to terminate their contracts if shipments did not resume within the week. Insurance companies wanted explanations. Patient advocacy groups issued statements expressing concern about medication shortages. Inside the company, chaos reigned. The board of directors called an emergency meeting for 10 o'clock that morning. All 12 board members attended either in person or by video conference. Gerald Hampton and Brandon Wright sat at the head of the table, looking like defendants at a trial. The board members were not happy. These were serious people. Former pharmaceutical executives, physicians, business school professors, venture capitalists. They had invested significant money and reputation in this company. Watching its value evaporate in 24 hours did not sit well with them. Board member after board member asked variations of the same question. How did this happen? Gerald tried to explain. He talked about cost reduction initiatives. He mentioned the need for fresh perspectives in the engineering department. He described the transition plan for bringing in younger talent. Dr. Helen Torres, a physician who had served on the board for 8 years, listened to all of it with increasing disbelief. Finally, she held up her hand. Stop. Just stop talking, Gerald. Gerald stopped mid-sentence. Dr. Torres had spent 30 years as a hospital administrator before joining corporate boards. She had an MD from Johns Hopkins and an MBA from Wharton. She did not suffer fools. Let me see if I understand this correctly. You terminated the principal engineer of record without ensuring you had a replacement who met federal requirements? We believe Derek Palmer could transition into that role, Gerald said defensively. Did you verify that Mr. Palmer had the necessary licensure before terminating Miss Stevens? Silence. Did you consult with your legal department about the regulatory requirements for this position? More silence. Did you consult with anyone who actually understands pharmaceutical manufacturing law before making this decision? Brandon spoke up. We identified it as a cost-saving opportunity. Bianca's salary was significantly higher than market average for her years of experience. Dr. Torres stared at him. What was her salary? $430,000 per year. And what does this facility generate in annual revenue? Brandon checked his notes. $912 million last fiscal year. Dr. Torres leaned back in her chair. You destroyed a $900 million operation to save $430,000. You shut down production of life-saving medications for 12,000 patients to save half of 1% of annual revenue. In 30 years of healthcare administration, this is the single stupidest business decision I have ever witnessed. The room fell silent. Other board members nodded. One of them, a former CEO of a medical device company, spoke up. Have we actually talked to Bianca Stevens about returning? Gerald cleared his throat. We've attempted to contact her. She hasn't responded substantively. What did we offer her? Brandon answered. Her previous position, same salary, same benefits. Dr. Torres laughed. It was not a happy sound. You fired her. You humiliated her. You demonstrated catastrophic incompetence. And you think she should come back for the same compensation she was receiving before? Why would she do that? What incentive does she have to save this company? Nobody had an answer. Dr. Torres looked around the table at her fellow board members. I move that we remove Gerald Hampton as board chair, effective immediately. Seconded, said another board member almost before she finished speaking. All in favor? 8 hands went up. Only 2 board members voted against the motion, both longtime friends of Gerald. The motion passed. I further move that I assume the role of interim board chair until this crisis is resolved and we can conduct a proper search for permanent leadership. This motion passed 10-0. Even Gerald's friends could see the writing on the wall. Dr. Torres wasted no time. Gerald, Brandon, you're both excused from this meeting. The board needs to discuss next steps. They left like scolded children. As soon as the door closed, Dr. Torres addressed the remaining board members. We have one option. We need Bianca Stevens back. The question is what we're willing to offer to make that happen. One of the board members, a venture capitalist, raised a concern. What if she refuses? What if she's too angry to come back at any price? Then we're looking at Chapter 11 bankruptcy within 6 months, Dr. Torres said bluntly. Our contracts will be canceled. Our stock will become worthless. 380 people lose their jobs. And we'll all have to explain to 12,000 patients why they can't get their medications anymore. The board authorized Dr. Torres to negotiate directly with me. They gave her broad authority to offer whatever it took. She called me at 11:15 that morning. I let it ring 3 times before answering. This is Bianca. Miss Stevens, this is Dr. Helen Torres. I'm a member of the board of directors, and as of about 20 minutes ago, I'm the interim board chair. Do you have a few minutes to talk? I have time, I said. First, I want to apologize to you, on behalf of the board. What happened to you was unconscionable. It was bad business, bad leadership, and bad ethics. You deserved better after 12 years of exemplary service. I said nothing, waiting. Second, I want to be honest with you about our situation. We're in serious trouble. 380 jobs are at risk. 12,000 patients need medications that only our facility produces. We made a catastrophic mistake, and we need your help to fix it. What happened to Gerald Hampton? I asked. He was removed as board chair this morning. He'll be leaving the company entirely within the next few days. And Brandon Wright? His employment status is under review. What would you want from me, Dr. Torres? I want you to come back. I want you to resume your role as principal engineer of record. I want you to help us get this facility operational again. And I want to make sure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else in this company. I'll need to think about it, I said. I'll call you tomorrow morning with my answer. That's fair. Bianca, one more thing. I know you have every reason to walk away and never look back, but I've spent my career in healthcare. I know what it means when patients can't get their medications. I'm asking you to consider them, even if you can't forgive us. I'll call you tomorrow, I repeated, and ended the call. I sat on my couch for a long time, thinking. Then I called Patricia Donnelly. I know exactly what I want, I told her. I called Dr. Torres at exactly 9 o'clock the next morning. She answered on the first ring. I'm willing to return to the company, I said without preamble, but I have 8 non-negotiable terms. If the board agrees to all 8, I'll start work immediately. If they don't, I walk away, and you can explain to the FDA why you still don't have a principal engineer of record. I want you to come back. I want you to resume your role as principal engineer of record. I want you to help us get this facility operational again. And I want to make sure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else in this company. First, I want a formal written acknowledgement from the board that my termination was wrongful and violated both company policy and federal regulations. Agreed. Second, full reinstatement with back pay from my termination date through today. Agreed. Third, a new 3-year employment contract with specific termination protections. I can only be terminated for cause, and cause must be defined in detail in the contract. Any dispute goes to binding arbitration. I'll need to run the specific language past legal, but in principle, agreed. Fourth, my salary increases to $650,000 per year, reflecting my actual market value and the leverage I currently hold. Dr. Torres paused. I heard her breath catch. That's a 51% increase. That's correct. You were paying me $430,000 to run a $900 million facility. You tried to replace me with someone making $210,000. Now you understand what happens when you undervalue critical expertise. 650 is my number. Another pause. Agreed. Fifth, Brandon Wright must be terminated immediately. For cause. With no severance package beyond what's legally required. Agreed. I was planning to recommend that regardless. Sixth, Gerald Hampton must issue a formal written apology to me, read aloud to the full board, acknowledging his failure of leadership and judgment. Agreed. Seventh, I want a seat on the board of directors. Sixth, Gerald Hampton must issue a formal written apology to me, read aloud to the full board, acknowledging his failure of leadership and judgment. I considered. Will this advisory role be written into my employment contract with the same 3-year term? Yes. Then I accept that modification. And eighth? Dr. Torres asked. Equity. I want 2% of company stock, fully vested immediately, not subject to any performance conditions or cliff periods. 2%. Dr. Torres did some mental math. At current valuation, even after the stock drop, that's worth approximately $4.3 million. Yes. You're asking for substantial compensation, Bianca. I'm asking for what I'm worth. Your company is learning a very expensive lesson about the cost of replacing someone irreplaceable. Consider this equity grant tuition for that education. Dr. Torres laughed. It sounded almost admiring. I'll present these terms to the board within the hour. Is there anything else? One more thing. Not a demand, just a request. I want Derek Palmer retained and properly trained. He's not responsible for Gerald and Brandon's incompetence. He has potential. I'd like the opportunity to mentor him toward his professional engineer license. That's very generous of you. It's practical. This facility will need a succession plan eventually. Better to develop internal talent properly than to repeat this disaster in 10 years. I'll recommend it. Give me 2 hours. I'll call you back. Dr. Torres called back in 90 minutes. The board has approved all 8 terms. Our attorneys are drafting contracts now. We can have everything ready for signature by 2 o'clock this afternoon. Can you come to the facility? I'll be there at 2. That was when I found it. Tucked into a stack of papers I was sorting. A corporate memo I had never seen before. The date at the top stopped me cold. 6 months ago. The subject line read, Cost Reduction Initiative, Engineering Department Restructuring. She extended her hand. It's good to meet you in person, Bianca. I wish it were under better circumstances. We went to the main conference room. Susan Bradford, the corporate attorney, had prepared a stack of documents. 3 employment contracts, multiple board resolutions, stock grant agreements, formal apologies. We went through each document carefully. Susan explained every clause. I asked questions. Patricia Donnelly, my attorney, reviewed everything via video conference on my laptop. At 3:15, I signed the final document. I was officially reinstated as Principal Engineer and Chief Technical Officer. My salary, my equity, my protections, everything was locked in legally. There's one more piece of business, Dr. Torres said. She pressed a button on the conference room phone. Send them in. The door opened. Brandon Wright entered, flanked by 2 security guards. He looked shell-shocked. Susan Bradford read from a prepared document. Mr. Wright, your employment with this company is terminated effective immediately for cause, specifically for gross negligence and failure to perform due diligence in compliance with federal regulations. You will receive 2 weeks of salary as required by law. Your company property, including laptop, phone, and access credentials, will be surrendered before you leave the building. I'm asking for what I'm worth. Your company is learning a very expensive lesson about the cost of replacing someone irreplaceable. Consider this equity grant tuition for that education. No, I said calmly. This is your doing. You made every decision that led to this moment. You chose to fire me without understanding the regulatory implications. You chose cost savings over compliance. You chose incompetence over expertise. I'm just the person who gets to watch you face the consequences. Security escorted him out. 5 minutes later, Gerald Hampton was brought in. He looked significantly worse than Brandon. His hands shook as Susan Bradford explained that while he would not be formally terminated, he was being removed from all leadership positions effective immediately. Dr. Torres handed him a piece of paper. Read this, please, out loud, to the full board. Gerald's voice cracked as he read. I, Gerald Hampton, acknowledge that the termination of Bianca Stevens was a failure of leadership on my part. I did not perform adequate due diligence. I did not ensure regulatory compliance. I endangered this company, its employees, and the patients we serve through negligent decision-making. I apologize to Miss Stevens for the disrespect shown to her expertise and dedication. I apologize to the board for failing in my fiduciary duties. I accept full responsibility for this crisis. When he finished, his face was red. He would not look at me. You're dismissed, Gerald, Dr. Torres said quietly. After he left, Dr. Torres turned to me. There's one more complication we need to discuss. Margaret Stevenson, the FDA auditor, is returning tomorrow morning for her 72-hour follow-up. I've been in contact with her office. She wants to meet with you personally before she'll sign off on resuming operations. My stomach dropped. What if she doesn't accept my reinstatement? What if the FDA decides to make an example of this company? Then we're in serious trouble, Dr. Torres admitted. But I think if anyone can convince her, it's you. You have the track record. You have the expertise. You're the person she's audited successfully for years. I nodded slowly. Then I guess I better be convincing. But as I drove home that evening, contract signed and equity granted, I felt a knot of anxiety in my chest. I had won every battle with the company. Tomorrow I had to win the one that actually mattered. I arrived at the facility at 6 the next morning. 380 employees were gathered in the parking lot. Someone had alerted them that I was coming back. As I walked from my car to the entrance, they applauded. Several people were crying. A woman from quality control hugged me. Thank you, she whispered. I have 2 kids in college. I can't lose this job. A man from manufacturing shook my hand. My wife has MS. Her medication comes from here. Thank you for coming back. The weight of responsibility settled over my shoulders like a heavy coat. This was not about revenge anymore. It was not about contracts or equity or proving a point. 380 families depended on this place. 12,000 patients needed these medications. That mattered more than anything Gerald and Brandon had done to me. Margaret Stevenson arrived at exactly 9 o'clock. Dr. Torres, Susan Bradford, Derek Palmer, and the head of quality assurance joined me in the main conference room. Margaret set up her materials with the same precise efficiency I remembered from previous audits. Miss Stevens, she said, nodding to me. I understand you've been reinstated. Yes, ma'am. As of yesterday afternoon. Margaret opened a folder. Walk me through what happened here. I want your perspective. I explained everything honestly. My termination, the company's failure to understand regulatory requirements, their attempt to replace a principal engineer of record with an unlicensed engineer, my reinstatement after the shutdown. I did not editorialize. I presented the facts clearly and professionally. Margaret listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked, "Do you have confidence that this company will not repeat this mistake?" "I have a 3-year contract with specific termination protections," I said. "I have an advisory role with the board of directors. I have equity stake in the company's success. The people who made the decision to terminate me are no longer in leadership positions. So, yes, I'm confident this won't happen again." Margaret reviewed my credentials, my professional engineer license, my certification history, the facility's audit record under my leadership, 7 consecutive years of 0 critical findings. "I'm satisfied with your reinstatement from a regulatory perspective," she said finally. "However, we have a more significant problem." My heart sank. What problem? "This facility has been non-operational for 4 days. All in-process manufacturing has been scrapped per protocol. Your environmental monitoring data has gaps. Your equipment qualification status is questionable after an unplanned shutdown. Before I can approve resumption of manufacturing, you need to perform complete facility requalification." Dr. Torres leaned forward. "How long does that typically take?" 6 to 8 weeks, minimum. Possibly longer depending on what the requalification reveals. 6 to 8 weeks. 12,000 patients would run out of medications. Hospital contracts would be canceled. The company might not survive that long financially. I took a deep breath. I can do it in 10 days. Everyone in the room looked at me. Margaret's eyebrows rose. 10 days? "Miss Stevens, facility requalification is an extensive process. Environmental monitoring, equipment qualification, utility validation, process verification, documentation review. You're talking about thousands of hours of work. I designed every system in this building," I said. "I wrote every qualification protocol. I know exactly what needs to be done, and in what order. I can mobilize my engineering team, we can work around the clock, and we can document everything to your standards. But I need your cooperation. I need you to be available for expedited document review as we complete each phase." Margaret studied me for a long moment. "You're asking me to commit significant time to reviewing your work on an accelerated schedule." "I am, but I've never given you a reason to doubt my work. 7 years of clean audits, perfect documentation, 0 critical findings. I'm asking you to trust that I can deliver the same quality in 10 days that most facilities take 2 months to produce." Margaret closed her folder. "I've audited hundreds of facilities in my career, Miss Stevens. Most of them view FDA inspections as an adversarial process. They try to hide problems, minimize findings, argue over technicalities. You've never done that. You run this facility like you actually care about patients, not just about passing audits." "I do care about patients," I said quietly. "I know. That's why I'm going to agree to your proposal. 10 days. You deliver complete requalification documentation. I'll review it as you submit each section. If the work is solid, I'll approve resumption of operations." Relief flooded through me. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. 10 days is an aggressive timeline. If you miss it, or if the work is substandard, I'll have no choice but to extend the shutdown. I spent 3 years of my life on that design. 3 years of 16-hour days, of calculations and recalculations, of fighting with contractors and vendors and regulatory consultants. I designed the cleanroom environmental control systems that maintained ISO Class 5 air quality. I specified the water purification systems that produced pharmaceutical-grade water. I developed the validated manufacturing processes for 6 different life-saving medications. Every single person said yes. The next 10 days were the most intense of my professional life. I divided the requalification work into teams: environmental monitoring, equipment qualification, utility systems, process verification. Each team had specific deliverables, specific deadlines, specific documentation requirements. I slept 4 hours a night. I reviewed every data point, every calibration certificate, every validation protocol. Derek Palmer worked beside me, taking notes, asking questions, learning. I taught him things I had learned over 12 years in pharmaceutical manufacturing. He was smart, dedicated, humble enough to admit what he did not know. Dr. Torres visited every day, bringing coffee and food and encouragement. She sat with tired engineers at 2 a.m, listening to their concerns, thanking them for their dedication. I began to understand why the board had chosen her as interim chair. She actually cared about people, not just profits. On day 5, we completed environmental monitoring qualification. Margaret reviewed our documentation within hours and approved it. On day 7, equipment qualification was done, approved. On day 9, we finished utility system validation and process verification. "I'll be there," I said. The following Monday, Dr. Torres called an all-hands meeting in the facility's largest conference space, 380 employees packed in, along with board members attending via video conference. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, she closed the final binder. "This is exceptional work," she said. "In 10 days, you produce documentation that meets or exceeds the standards I typically see from 2-month requalification projects. I'm approving immediate resumption of manufacturing operations." The conference room erupted in cheers. People hugged each other. Someone started crying from sheer relief. Derek high-fived everyone in reach. I stood at the window, looking down at the manufacturing floor. Equipment that had been silent for 2 weeks would hum to life tomorrow. Medications would be produced. Patients would get their prescriptions filled. 380 people would keep their jobs. Dr. Torres came to stand beside me. "The board wants to recognize you formally. Company-wide meeting next Monday. I hope you'll accept." They left like scolded children. As soon as the door closed, Dr. Torres addressed the remaining board members. "We have one option. We need Bianca Stevens back. The question is, what we're willing to offer to make that happen." Dr. Torres spoke first. She publicly acknowledged the crisis, the mistakes made by former leadership, and the collective effort that saved the facility. Then she turned to me. "I want to announce several changes," she said. "First, Bianca Stevens has been promoted to Vice President of Engineering and Chief Technical Officer. Second, her leadership over the past 2 weeks resulted in the most successful rapid facility requalification in this company's history. Third, she has agreed to serve as an advisor to the board of directors, ensuring that technical and regulatory considerations are properly weighted in all major business decisions." The room applauded. I stood and gave a brief speech. "I want to thank everyone who worked around the clock for the past 2 weeks, I said. "This wasn't about me. It was about the 12,000 patients who depend on the medications we manufacture. It was about protecting 380 jobs. It was about doing what we were trained to do, produce safe, effective medications under strict quality standards." I paused, looking around the room. "I also want to acknowledge Derek Palmer. He worked beside me every day, learning, asking questions, taking on responsibilities. He has a bright future in this industry." Dr. Torres came to stand beside me. "The board wants to recognize you formally. Company-wide meeting next Monday. I hope you'll accept." "You weren't the problem," I told him. "You were a tool used by people who should have known better. The difference is that you're willing to learn. You'll take your professional engineer exam when you're eligible. I'll sponsor your application personally." 3 months passed. Derek studied every night and passed his first professional engineer exam on the first try. I mentored him through the application process for his license. The facility operated smoothly, producing medications without interruption. We passed our next regular FDA audit with 0 findings. Margaret Stevenson noted in her report that the facility maintained the highest standards of compliance she had observed in the pharmaceutical industry. Gerald Hampton took a position at a small medical device company in Kansas. I heard through industry contacts that he lasted 6 months before being let go. Brandon Wright struggled to find work. Word had spread through pharmaceutical industry networks about the disaster he had created. No serious company wanted to risk hiring him. I occasionally thought about those 72 hours between my termination and my reinstatement. I could have called them immediately. I could have warned them about the regulatory requirements. I could have prevented the shutdown entirely. But sometimes institutions need to feel the consequences of their decisions. Sometimes the only way people learn is by experiencing the full weight of their mistakes. If I had saved them immediately, they would have learned nothing. Gerald and Brandon would have continued making short-sighted decisions, undervaluing expertise, prioritizing cost savings over competence. Margaret came to the facility on the morning of day 10. She had a stack of documentation 3 inches thick. She reviewed every page. She asked detailed questions. She spot-checked data against original records. I learned things too. For 12 years, I had tied my identity to this company. I had given them everything. My expertise, my time, my dedication. I had assumed that loyalty and competence would be valued, that doing excellent work would provide job security. I learned that your value is not determined by how others treat you. It is determined by what you know, what you can do, what you have built. When people fail to recognize that value, sometimes the most powerful response is to step back and let reality teach the lesson you cannot. I learned that advocating for yourself is not selfish, it is necessary. Standing up for your worth protects not just you, but everyone who depends on your expertise. Those 12,000 patients needed me. Those 380 employees needed me. But they only got me back because I refused to accept being undervalued. I learned that true power is not in being needed. It is in knowing your worth and refusing to compromise it. Gerald and Brandon needed me desperately during those 72 hours. But I had all the power because I knew exactly what I was worth, and I would not settle for less. The pharmaceutical industry talks a lot about quality systems and regulatory compliance. But the real lesson is simpler. Respect expertise. Value the people who make your operation work. Understand that some positions cannot be filled by cheaper alternatives. Recognize that saving money in the short term can cost you everything in the long term. I stood at my office window on a Friday afternoon, watching the manufacturing floor operate at full capacity. 12,000 patients would receive their medications this month. 380 people would get their paychecks. A young engineer named Derek was learning to become the next generation of pharmaceutical manufacturing leadership. I built this facility twice, once from blueprints, once from ashes. The first time, I built it for a company that took me for granted. The second time, I built it with protections that ensured I could never be discarded again. Nobody could take this away from me now. Not because they did not want to, but because they finally understood what it would cost them to try. The best revenge is not revenge at all. It is success. It is standing tall, while others face the consequences of their own choices. It is knowing your worth, demanding what you deserve, and building something that cannot be destroyed by small-minded decisions made by people who should have known better. I turned back to my desk, where Derek's application for his professional engineer license awaited my signature as his sponsoring engineer. I signed it with a smile. The future was being built, one mentored engineer at a time. And this time, I would make sure that future was built on a foundation of respect, competence, and the understanding that expertise has value that cannot be replaced or discounted. That is the lesson I want to leave you with. Know your worth, demand what you deserve. And when people fail to recognize your value, have the courage to step back and let them learn what it costs to lose you. What would you have done in my position? Would you have warned the company immediately, or would you have let them face the consequences of their decision? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself in difficult workplace situations. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message about knowing their worth, please share this story with them. Thank you for listening, and remember, your expertise, your experience, and your dedication have real value. Never let anyone convince you otherwise.